Joining me now is Brock Otten, the man behind OHL Prospects. And Brock, let's start with one of the biggest questions heading into this OHL draft, which is how will COVID-19 affect the draft?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, scouts are going out to all the early tournaments. They were going out to all the playdowns and various league playoffs. But with the cancellation of the OHL Cup, no OHL Combine, it's going to change the way that teams are going to have to make decisions. You're not going to have some of those kids that would have risen up the ranks with a really strong OHL Cup performance. You're going to have the whole wild card of the American kids in the draft as well, and maybe not being able to put in your due diligence quite as much in recruiting. Those trips would have been canceled likely, so it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes down next Saturday.
Overall, Brock, how do you see this OHL draft class?
I think it's a strong draft class, but majority of those kids are the American kids. So it's just a matter of how many of them are swayed to come to the OHL. Already, so many of them signed up with the National Development Team program. So, that's going to be hard for OHL teams to convince them to cancel that. It does happen, but it's very, very rare. More than likely, if you do manage to sway them, it's going to be after their 2 years in the development program. If you're looking at just the Ontario kids, it's a strong group, but it's going to be interesting again next Saturday to see how it all shakes down because there isn't really like a really strong tiered section of grouping. It's I would say there's about 4 or 5 kids at the top, and then it's very wide open, and it's going to depend on whether teams look at maybe more positional organizational need, um, personal preference in terms of maybe like we talked about earlier in uh, areas that your scouting department has seen a little bit more, with COVID. That's going to be the big thing is just seeing how many American kids are convinced to come.
Is that unusual this year, the strength of the Americans in this draft class?
I don't think it's unusual for this age. I think the American hockey organizations are becoming so much more advanced, and we're seeing the crop is just strong every year now. Um, it's just a matter of how many of those kids commit to the development team program or the USHL and committing to college, right? But I think this year is definitely a stronger year, and in terms of lack of commitment to coming to the OHL, I think is also hurting the recruitment process. Um, I think this is a trend that's going to continue, though. Moving forward, I think we're just going to continue to see some of the higher end kids being American, and obviously we're going to have some really strong crop of Ontario kids too mixed in. But I don't see this changing really anytime soon.
In terms of positions, where do you see the strength in this draft class, and what positions are maybe not as deep?
I think the center position is really strong this year. You have a lot of top end centers that are in that sort of mix for the top seven. You got Paul Ludwinski from the Marlboros. You got Dylan Wakely. You got Bryce McConnell Barker. You got Kocha Delic. You have Pano Finis. Those five are sort of the top centers available, and they could really go in any order. So if you're looking for that kid that's going to be an anchor for your OHL program for the next 3 or 4 years down the middle, and if you're choosing at the top of the draft, that's going to be a positional strength. And I think there's actually a lot of depth at that position as well. Um, that's yeah. And that's a good thing, right? You build from the middle out. A lot of these players are probably going to end up changing positions over the course of their OHL career anyway, but you do want that flexibility and drafting that and having a strong, 1-2 punch down the middle is obviously extremely important for an OHL franchise.
You mentioned a few there, but who are some of the players who are most ready to step in and make a difference right away in the OHL?
Well, the first one we should probably start with is Ty Nelson. He's a defenseman. He's generally ranked as the first or second available Canadian after Adam Fantilli, of course. He's an undersized defenseman, but he moves the puck really well. Kind of that new age style defender with extremely good mobility. Likes to be aggressive and jumping up in the rush. Plays bigger than his size. He's not somebody who plays soft despite being about 5'8". He's pretty stocky. So he's someone that's going to come in and probably make a pretty immediate impact, especially in terms of running a power play to start. After that, I mean, you've got some of the centers that I talked about. Paul Ludwinski is probably my favorite of that group. He's the captain of the Marlboros, a really strong two-way center, really good skater, and obviously that's going to play at the OHL level, the hockey sense as well. As he gets stronger and becomes a little more confident, I think he should be able to step right in and be an impact player.
So the Guelph Storm will be picking at the number 12 position in the first round. What could you see them doing in this draft, and where should they focus?
Well, I think with the Storm, they just need to focus on getting the best player available. I know that sometimes that's a cliche response, but with the Storm, I mean, this year was supposed to be the rebuild year, right? But that didn't really go according to plan, and I mean that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the Storm. It's a good thing for their development that their players took that step forward. But next year, I think they're facing that even more so. There's a lot of wild cards. I mean, do they get Nico Dawes back? If he gets drafted, right? He's eligible to go to the AHL next year, having aged out. Same thing with Cam Hillis if he signs with the Canadians. If Pavel Goga, gets drafted again. So I think that they really need to focus on just getting the player that they think is going to have the biggest impact. They have some good young talent, whether it's Chayka on defense or Zilkin up front. So it's just finding somebody that's going to be able to support and provide added depth once you lose some of those guys. In a perfect world, probably a center. You're losing Cedric Ralph. You're losing probably Cam Hillis. I would imagine he signs with Montreal. From there, you're going to want another quality center to play with Zilkin. So I think with the depth of the center position, I think looking at that spot, where they pick in the first round, they're going to be able to get a pretty good player there if that's what they end up choosing to do.
Speaking with Guelph Storm on Rogers TV host Trevor Pryor, he mentioned the Storm are lacking size up front, especially compared to the big bodies they had on the championship team in 2019. How is the depth in terms of the taller, stronger players available in this draft class that the Storm might be able to target?
Yeah, there are definitely some kids like that. I mean, the best one in terms of fitting that mold would probably be Sam Alfano from Southern Deer Admirals, but he's not a center. He's a big winger. He's about 6'3", real big kid, a goal scorer, the type of kid that's going to fit into any lineup, right? So again, if they feel like he's going to be the best player available at that spot and he's going to fit into their lineup the best, I mean, that's somebody that I could definitely see going in that range as well. I mean, the 6'3" kids that can skate and put the puck in the net, they don't last long on OHL draft day. If you look at it from a historical perspective, and I would expect that to continue with a guy like him.
For these OHL franchises, what is it that makes a draft successful or not so successful for them?
Well, I think the first thing is recruitment, right? I mean, you can draft these kids, but if your organization isn't pitching to those players why they should be joining and actually getting to sign on the dotted line, I mean, that's going to be something that makes an unsuccessful draft day, right? I mean, at the end of the day, these are kids, so they do have some power, and as they should have some power as to whether they come and play for your organization. There's a lot of different opportunities out there for them, and you see, at the draft, whether it be a year from now or 2 years from now, there are kids in the second and third round who don't come. They go a different route, be it the NCAA or something else, whether they get their rights get traded. So I think that's number one. Number two is just finding quality OHL players. If you can come out of a draft year with 4 or 5 really good, top 9 forwards, top 4 defensemen, or top 5 defensemen, maybe a goalie that can play for you. I mean, I think that makes a really positive draft for your organization. And obviously, you're going to supplement that with the import draft, and you're going to supplement it with free agent signings. But ultimately, if you're not bringing in players from the actual priority selection year after year, that's when those rebuild cycles last a little bit longer, right? If you want to turn it around in a couple of years, that's what you have to do. And you see some organizations in the OHL who, have sort of floundered in that 7 to 10 range at the bottom of the conference for 3 or 4 year cycles, and that's just because they weren't able to draft successfully. So it is a big day for a lot of franchises.
Thanks for joining me for this insight, Brock. Enjoy the draft on Saturday.
Yeah, anytime. My pleasure.